Kan jij in de chat zetten of zij kan laten weten of ze echt om 7 uur een andere meeting heeft? Ja, het is 7 uur haar tijd. Nou, het zou kunnen dat we een paar minuten uitlopen, want ik kan me ook voorstellen dat we een paar minuten later beginnen. Good evening, everyone, and welcome in the Balie. My name is Annemarijn Epker. I'm a program editor here and will be your host this evening. Tonight, we have the great honor of welcoming the world-famous ethologist and environmentalist Dr. Jane Goodall here in the Balie via Zoom. She is the founder of the Jane Goodall Institute and UN Messenger of Peace. And we will speak with her this evening about what the world could look like after this COVID-19 pandemic. How will this crisis change our relationship between humans and animals? And what will we start doing differently after this crisis? The now 87-year-old Jane Goodall was used to travel all around the world for 300 days a year, but since the COVID crisis started, is stuck to her home in Bournemouth. We're really happy that she is here with us tonight. Maybe we can see her on the screen already. Yes? Welcome, welcome. Yeah, Jane, I just read that you really miss real conversations with people and looking people in the eyes, because that's also really important for you. And that was the reason why I wanted to ask our camera crew whether they could also shine a light on you, on our audience here in the Balie, to show you who are here with us this evening. And I'm not sure if you can see us already. But maybe it's a good moment to say hi to Jane from...
Nice.
So you also get some energy back, because I can imagine that looking at the screen the whole day is terrible for you. Must be terrible. I'm also really happy to welcome our other speaker this evening, Auke Florian Hiemstra from Naturalis in Leiden. He's a Ph.D. researcher and is also focusing on the interactions between animals and human beings, but more in an urban context. So he did research, for example, into how birds use plastic products to build their nests, and lately also a lot about how corona protection materials come into our environment and and how that impacts the natural world around us. So I'm really happy you're here with us.
Thanks so
much.
Well.
But Jane Goodall, we're going to start with you, and we have asked you to prepare a short keynote to open this evening. So I would like to invite you. The Zoom floor is yours.
Okay, well, thank you so much. And hello to everybody. Yes, indeed, I saw you sitting there. And it is quite a change, because I'm used to just speaking to nothing, and difficult, just giving talks to looking at a little spot on top of your laptop and imagining a big audience there that you can't see. Anyway, let me jump into my little 10-minute talk, because I'm really happy to be able to share some thoughts with you this evening. And, you know, this pandemic, it's really affected every country. It's caused suffering, loss of life and loved ones, loss of jobs and economic chaos. Tragedy is we brought it on ourselves. More and more people are understanding this, but some people don't realize that it was our absolute disrespect of nature and animals that caused it, because we're destroying more and more wild habitats. We're penetrating ever deeper into wilderness areas. Wild animals are often forced into closer contact with people. And then we hunt, kill, and capture them and traffic them or their body parts, often illegally, to sell in wildlife markets around the world. We sell them for food, medicine, clothing, or as exotic pets. And in all of these situations, we create perfect conditions that make it relatively easy for a pathogen such as a bacteria or a virus to spill over from an animal to a human. And when that happens, it may create a new so-called zoonotic disease. COVID-19, like SARS, was probably caused by a virus jumping from an animal to a human in a wildlife market in China. HIV-1 and HIV-2 originated from chimpanzees in 2 different bushmeat markets in Central Africa. MERS, Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, originated from a domestic Bactrian camel in Saudi Arabia. And many other zoonotic diseases have originated from the horrific conditions created by industrial animal agriculture, where billions of animals are confined in so-called factory farms. In fact, we're told that 75% of all new human diseases are zoonotic in origin. And at this point, as an aside, I feel it's important to emphasize that we now know that all these animals, wild and domestic alike, are individual beings. They can feel, among other emotions, fear and despair and pain. And yet they're treated as mere commodities. The scale of their suffering is almost unimaginable. And we shouldn't forget also the suffering of those animals used to develop cures and vaccines for the very diseases caused by our cruel treatment of animals in the first place. But terrible as this pandemic is, and think now of India and Nepal, there are far greater threats to our future: climate change and the loss of biodiversity. And both of these looming disasters are the result of the same disrespect of the natural world. Both, like zoonotic diseases, have long been predicted by scientists working in these fields. If only we'd paid attention to those warnings. It's desperately important that we should understand that we humans are part of the natural world, not separated from it. Moreover, we depend on it for food, water, clean air, everything. But what we depend on is healthy ecosystems. It was in the rainforests of Gombe, where for years I studied chimpanzees, that I learned firsthand about the interconnection of the animals and plants that made up the forest ecosystem, and how each species had a role to play in the complex tapestry of life, the biodiversity of the forest. It may seem unimportant if one seemingly insignificant species becomes extinct, but maybe it was the main food source of another species, which will then also become extinct. And this in turn may affect the survival of another species, and so on, and so on, and so on. And as each species goes, it's as though a thread is pulled from the tapestry of life, until eventually, if enough species become extinct, that tapestry hangs in tatters, and then the whole ecosystem may collapse. And as I've said, it's healthy ecosystems on which we depend. It's become increasingly clear that we have to develop a new relationship with the natural world and a new, more sustainable economy. We have to abandon the absurd notion that there can be unlimited economic development on a planet with finite natural resources and growing populations of humans and our livestock. Unfortunately, there are powerful forces that are determined to get back to business as usual. Leaders in governments and businesses who are only concerned with making more money, gaining more power, and putting short-term gain ahead of protecting the environment for future generations. And this means it's never been more important for those of us who care to get together and take action for change now. There are some who believe it's already too late, that we're on a downward trajectory that will end with the extinction of life on Earth as we know it, including our own species. But I'm not alone in believing there's a window of time during which, if we get together and take action now, we can at least slow down climate change and the loss of biodiversity. I don't think it's a very big window, and it's closing all the time. As I see it, there's at least 3 major problems that we have to solve. First, we need to reduce the unsustainable lifestyle of so many of us who have so much more than we need, who waste so much, who are caught up in a materialistic lifestyle, who've lost our connection to the natural world. Secondly, and most importantly, we must alleviate poverty. For those in poverty will destroy the environment out of necessity. They'll cut down trees to make charcoal to sell, or to make land to grow food for their families, simply in order to survive. In urban areas, the poor will buy the cheapest junk food because they have to. They don't have the luxury that we do of asking if it harmed the environment, was cruel to animals, is cheap because of unfair wages, or even if it's bad for their health, they have to buy the cheapest just to survive. And then thirdly, we have to think about population growth, a subject that many people shy away from. But the facts already, there are over 7 billion of us on the planet. And in some places, natural resources are being harvested faster than nature can replenish them. And in 2050, it's been predicted that there are likely to be closer to 10 billion of us. What will happen if we carry on with business as usual? Let me point out here that the main difference between us and other animals is the explosive development of our intellect. And this makes it truly bizarre that we're destroying our only home, planet Earth. We may be clever, but we need to acquire the wisdom still found in so many indigenous people, those who've acted as guardians of their ancestral lands. I truly believe that only when head and heart, and in the heart we poetically seek love and compassion, only when head and heart work in harmony can we attain our true human potential. The good news in all this is that there is a way forward. There's an increasing number of programs that are working to help people lift themselves out of poverty. And I've got firsthand knowledge of the difference that this can make. It was towards the end of the 80s when I flew over the tiny Gombe National Park, where I studied the chimps. It was once part of the equatorial forest belt that stretched right across from East Africa to the West African coast. But by 1990, I was shocked to see it was just an isolated island of forest surrounded by bare hills. There were clearly too many people for the land to support, and they were too poor to buy food from elsewhere. And they were destroying the forest in their desperation to create new land to feed their families, to grow food. And that's when it hit me. If we don't help these people find ways of making a livelihood without destroying the forest, we can't save chimps or anything else. So the Jane Goodall Institute, JGI, we started our method of community-based conservation, which we call Take Care of Takari. From the beginning, we've worked closely with the villagers. We've helped to restore fertility to the land, introduced water management programs, provided scholarships to give girls the chance of secondary education, worked on providing microfinance programs to enable people to start their own environmentally sustainable businesses. And we've trained villagers to use smartphones to monitor the health of their village forest reserves. And that's where almost all of Tanzania's remaining chimpanzee population is to be found. There's no protection for them in these forest reserves. Because the people now understand that protecting the environment is not just to protect wildlife, but for their own future, that they rely on the forest. There are no more bare hills around Gombe, and the villagers understand that they're working for their own future. So they've become our partners in conservation. And this Takari program, as we call it, is in 6 other countries around chimpanzee habitat. Now I must emphasize the importance of education. If children don't grow up to be better stewards than we've been, all our efforts will have been in vain. I think it's desperately important to make environmental education a compulsory part of all school curricula, and to encourage outdoor education programs, especially for younger children. If you have no direct experience of nature, you won't understand it, learn to love it, and understand the importance of protecting it. Roots and Shoots is JGI's humanitarian and environmental program for young people from kindergarten through university. It's just one of many educational programs around the world. But we encourage our thousands of groups in 68 countries to choose projects to benefit people, animals, and the environment. They choose them themselves. The energy, commitment, and passion of youth, once they know the problems, are empowered to take action. They're my greatest reason for hope. It's not that young people can change the world. They are already changing it through their actions. Some of our original members have already moved into the adult world, and they've taken the values they acquired with them. What are those values? Respect for people, animals, and the environment. Another reason for hope is the proliferation of projects to plant trees, restore forests and woodlands, and especially protect the remaining old-growth forests with all their rich biodiversity. And there are many groups working to clean up our oceans. Forests and oceans absorb carbon dioxide from the environment and help to regulate the climate and rainfall. Finally, people are coming to realize the devastating effect that industrial agriculture, particularly industrial animal agriculture, is having on the environment. More money needs to be invested in agriculture that works with and not against nature. We need to replace monocultures and genetically modified crops with small family farming programs, permaculture, restorative agriculture. And we need to ban the use of chemical pesticides, herbicides, and overuse of artificial fertilizers, because all of this is reducing biodiversity and increasing the damaging emissions of carbon dioxide and methane produced by these billions of animals in digestion. And they're the two main greenhouse gases. To end, we can turn things around, but we must take action now, together. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much for your wonderful talk and sharing your thoughts with us, Dr. Jane Goodall. My first question to you actually would be, last year, a bit more than 1 year ago, we thought, well, while this crisis started, we thought this is the moment that we are really going to do things differently. And I was curious to hear from you whether you're actually satisfied or dissatisfied with the structural changes that you have seen in the past year.
Well, I've seen and heard a lot of talk about how we need to change. And this talk comes from business and government. But the real voice demanding change, seeking for change, working for change, comes from the youth. It's the young people, and it's not surprising because it's their future that we're compromising. And you know, for years and years, we've been stealing their future. So now that finally, in educational programs, young people are being told what's happening. And so of course, they're concerned. Many of them are losing hope. We've compromised their future, they said. There's nothing we can do about it. That's why I began Roots and Shoots in 1991. And so am I satisfied or not with the progress since COVID-19? I'm satisfied that there has been awakening awareness. Far more people now understand the need for change. People are talking in the right talk, but they've talked before, some of these big organizations, and it hasn't always led to the action that I would have hoped. I just have to hope that somehow we can get a momentum and a push so that all these great ideas and talks and ideas can be made reality. That's what it depends on.
Yeah, so we started talking and maybe some awareness has been raised, but we now need structural actions, maybe.
Yeah.
Elke Florian, I was wondering, what struck you most about what you just heard in Jane's talk?
Well, let me just first say I love the bookshelf. It's exactly how I imagined old books, some fresh flowers, and great photos. But then my question, you talked about governments. And actually, during the pandemic, politicians made quite a lot of big decisions in quite a short amount of time. While in tackling environmental problems, we only take these very tiny baby steps, and it takes ages. So my question is, how can we speed up the process of change as there's not much time left?
Well, we all need to get involved, don't we? I mean, you know, we can go on blaming governments and corporations, but if we feel that a company is producing goods in an unsustainable way, an unethical way, we can refuse to buy them unless we're living in extreme poverty. That's why alleviating poverty is so important, so everybody can make those ethical decisions. In democracies, we elect people into governing positions in government. But unfortunately, many countries around the world have become very autocratic, and democracy is literally hanging on the edge. I'm very worried about that. But anyway, when we elect somebody into like an environmental minister, I've seen this happen. The person elected is really keen to make change. And so they introduce some legislation. Well, perhaps that legislation means that the food you buy might cost a few cents more. So people turn against them. The point is, if something costs a little bit more, then you value it more and you waste less. So our waste of food and almost everything else is one of the great problems that we face today. Waste, waste, waste. And I think I was lucky to grow up in World War II because everything was rationed. Food and clothing, you know, all had coupons. And we learned to not take anything for granted. So the young people today, it's not their fault, but they take the fact that they're going to have 3 meals a day and they're going to have electricity and they're going to have running water. And they haven't all had the opportunity to go into some of these developing countries where those things are not on the menu.
Yeah, I was also wondering, it's interesting that you refer to your own experience during the World War II, because reading your work, I was also thinking that this corona crisis might be kind of the same experience for young people now, where there is scarcity, limited freedoms, and they have to miss a lot of things, of course. In one way, it's not comparable at all, and in other ways, it might be kind of the same experience. Do you think that that would be a possibility, or?
Well, I really hope it is, because then they will have come out of it with a different mindset. And for some of them, it surely will make a big difference. For others, and I know some of them, they just want to get back to doing what they did before. And they can't wait, you know, to throw off their masks and get back with their friends and go back into exactly the same unsustainable lifestyle as they lived before. So let's pray there's enough who understand. You know, we're now fighting an invisible enemy with a virus. And when I grew up in the war, we were fighting actual physical people. But in a way, it's the same, and in a way, it's very different. And we've come to rely on science and rely on vaccines, or hate vaccines, as the case may be. So we're in a state of flux. I mean, nobody really knows what's going to happen with this pandemic. It keeps changing. New variants emerge, and we don't know what effect they will have, and whether the vaccines will be able to, whether the vaccines will actually protect us against some of these new variants. We cross our fingers and hope so.
Yeah. What is your idea about that? Are you hopeful about the fact whether we are able to contain this zoonotic diseases, or do you think this will be normal from now on?
Well, it'll be normal if we don't change our attitude. We've got to close down illegal animal trafficking. We've got to close down wildlife markets. We've got to abolish factory farming. I mean, factory farming hasn't led to a pandemic so far, but it's led to many of these zoonotic diseases. You know, they say 75% of all new human diseases are zoonotic in origin. And many of those have come from these intensive animal farms, which are basically like concentration camps for animals.
Yeah. I was curious to hear from you about this economic crisis, because first we had the health crisis, economic crisis will be following. You just touched upon the problem of poverty, and that poverty is an enormous factor in making unfriendly decisions for the environment. What do you think the effects of this economic crisis will be for the future of our natural world?
Well, it depends how we solve the problem of poverty, doesn't it? And, you know, you read things which make you feel, what on earth is going on? Like the richest man in the world is Jeff Bezos of Amazon. He doesn't pay taxes. He doesn't have to pay taxes. And, you know, this makes you think, what is this democracy? What is it? Okay, he puts a lot of money into noble programs, but he can afford it. He doesn't suffer from it. He goes on making more money and not paying taxes.
Yeah.
So if he gets to choose what his money goes to, whereas if he paid taxes, it would be more evenly distributed among the people of the country where he pays the taxes.
Mm-hmm.
So let's imagine that Jeff Bezos is here with us. What would you say to him?
I would ask him, I would say, Jeff, how do you actually feel about not having to pay taxes? And I'd be very interested in what he said, how he answered.
I would like that too.
Yeah, I was also curious whether you are approaching specific people in the world that you would like to speak to. I read, for example, that you would be happy to meet the Pope once. I'm also wondering if you are really reaching out to people and who that people are.
Oh, I reach out to people, and my great, you know, the way that I feel is important. If you're reaching out to somebody in a high place, find out a little bit about them. It may be somebody who's doing things that you utterly disapprove of. Well, you know, there's two ways you can approach that. You can go in full of accusations and point out all the harm that they're doing and the unethical decisions that they're making. Or you can try and find just something that makes a link between you. Maybe that person loves dogs, or I don't know, something like that. So you have a tiny moment of connection because you share something. And then my mother taught me, then listen to them, because maybe they, you know, it's useful to know why they think the way they think. And then how do you change people? Well, the only way I know is to reach the heart, because I think people have to change from within. And how do I reach the heart of people, or try to, by telling stories, finding the right story to tell to the person you're talking to. And you may not know at the time that you've made an impact. I've got some wonderful examples of finding out later the impact you made that you never thought you'd made at the time.
Did you have another question?
Another question from me. We're living on a planet with a climate crisis, a plastic problem, a biodiversity crisis. So my question is, where did it go wrong? And when did you personally start to realize that something had to be done?
Well, to answer the second part first, I think we all know what went wrong. We didn't listen to the people who knew. We just didn't listen to the scientists who were studying climate change. We didn't listen to the people who were predicting more and more zoonotic diseases. We chose to ignore it. So that's what went wrong. And for me, well, I was happiest my whole life being in the rainforest at Gombe and learning about this amazing interconnection of all living things in the forest. But then at a conference in 1986, we had a session on conservation. I was shocked to see right across Africa, wherever chimps by then were being studied, the forests were disappearing, the chimp numbers were dropping, and also a session on conditions in some captive situations. And after seeing secretly filmed videos of chimpanzees in medical research, our closest living relatives, highly social, incredibly intelligent beings in 5 foot by 5 foot cages. Why? Because their bodies are so like ours. And so scientists felt, this is the perfect model for testing vaccines and cures for the diseases which we can infect them with. But other animals less like us will not be infected. And so these same scientists refuse to listen to the fact that psychologically and behaviorally, they're so like us. And what they were doing was equivalent to putting a person in prison, just taking somebody and putting them in solitary confinement without them knowing why on earth they're there. I knew I had to do something, so I didn't know what to do.
I was just wondering if you could if the sound is good in the rest of the hall. Do you hear it, Jane, very well, or does it need to be a bit louder? Maybe a bit louder. And also here, please, that would be great. Thank you so much. Yeah, and I was also wondering, Ms. Goodall, did you also see some positive changes in the past year? Because we are speaking also a lot about the positive impact on the cities, for example, that there is much more biodiversity into some cities because there is less traffic and less noise. And did you also experience some positive things in the past year?
Well, very temporary positive things, but I think perhaps one effect, people from some major megacities probably for the first time in their lives breathed clean air. For the first time in their lives, they could look up at night and see stars shining brightly instead of through a haze of pollution. And so those people will not want to go back to the world as it could and should be. But mostly they come from places where their voices are not listened to. So, the problems facing us are environmental, yes, but they're also political, social. There's an awful lot of work we have to do, but we've just got to get together and do it. And luckily, there's enough people and enough different organizations tackling these different aspects of the problem, because nobody can do one all by themselves. So we need to get these different groups together to create the kind of future that if we don't create it, then it's going to be a grim outlook for human species, our great-great-grandchildren. Think of it.
And what do you think the right strategies would be to bring all those people together? Because I totally agree with what you're saying. That would be the most important thing to do. But how are we going to get those people together and to organize ourselves? And what would you advise on that point?
Well, I can't really. I don't think that's my job. My job is to inspire people and give them hope. And there should be other people out there who can deal with the kind of problem that you pose. How do we bring the people together? I would like to see small groups of people coming from different, like some people from environment, some people from agriculture, some people, and bring them together in small groups, not big fancy things, not with the media, not with reporting, just people talking to each other, intelligent people, people who care about the future and the planet, and see what result that would have.
Yeah. And Elke, I actually wanted to pose the same question to you. What did you see happening in the cities? Because you also do a lot of research in Leiden and other cities. What did you see happening?
Well, I'm not sure if there's so much more biodiversity, certainly in cities. However, with less sound around in cities, for example, more people realize that there are actually, you can hear birds in cities. So some people thought, well, the birds returned to the city. They were actually already there. So I hope if we have one key message from this pandemic, that we all remember that the cities are actually full of biodiversity. And often you hear people say, I'm going into nature, and then they mean I'm leaving the city. However, in this city, there's so much to find. So much animals, so much birds, so much biodiversity to find. So I hope we can realize that.
And you also wanted to show a picture this evening, right?
Yeah.
Can we maybe show this, because it shows like the interaction between how we are trying to fight the pandemic and the impact it has on a lot of animals.
Yeah. So let me quickly describe what we see here. We see some COVID litter, a single-use glove. Within the thumb of the glove, a perch, a fish, one of the common fishes from the Leiden canals. And this item was found during a plastic spotter canal cleanup. So we do a cleanup every week in the Leiden canals where this glove was found. And it was such a weird moment when suddenly one of our volunteers came to us and said, well, I found a glove, but there's still a fish inside. And so we wrote an article about this, and we gathered all other examples of how our face masks and gloves actually are affecting wildlife. And it's so ironic to think that the material which protects us is actually harming the animals around us. And actually, Jane, if you're still here, maybe a question for you is, when you give people the option to have a single-use face mask or a reusable one, they tend to pick the single-use version every time. So how can we convince people to choose a reusable option, which also is the same for a plastic bag or for a plastic cup? How can we convince people to choose a sustainable option?
Well, I tend to work through the young people in our Roots and Shoots program. And when you bring young people together to discuss a problem like that, it's unbelievable how their imagination and their determination and their passion will lead to solutions. And so as we've created these problems for our young people, it's wonderful to be able to help them as they get together to try and find solutions. And it's amazing the ideas they come up with. You know, we have, in our Roots and Shoots program, we have campaigns every year, which they don't have to join, but we hope that they do. We have one ongoing on wildlife trafficking. We have one on plastic waste, particularly single-use plastic bags, and so on, and so on, and so on. And the single-use plastic bag, how do you persuade people? I don't know, but this is the advantage of an autocratic government. So in Tanzania, the president banned single-use plastic. And within 2 weeks, the streets were clean. There were no more single-use plastic, whereas previously they'd been everywhere. And a previous president said, we need to make the streets greener. And so within a very short time, trees were being planted all along the highways, providing a shade and, of course, bringing in the natural world. So there's some advantages to autocratic governments in this field anyway.
Yeah, indeed. It's an interesting issue you mentioned there. Speaking about how to involve the young people, I'm also always really curious to hear your advice on how we're going to get those people from behind their screens. I mean, I'm also looking at the screen 8 hours a day, and I think you too, but there's a lot of young people, of course, also who are just not interested, who don't care about the environment, who just play games and watch television. And how are we going to engage them as well? This is, of course, the group that is harder to reach for those Roots and Shoots programs, etc.
Well, if you start them young, I don't know any really small children, 3 years, 4 years, if you take them out into nature, give them a chance to mess about in the earth, give them a chance to watch things growing, give them a chance to watch a caterpillar change into a butterfly. They are so fascinated. I mean, there was this little boy, he was 3 years old, and he was watching a snail gliding along the ground. He watched it, he was very curious, and suddenly he picked it up, he ran inside, he put it on a pane of window glass, ran outside and watched it climbing up. I mean, the children are curious, and if you give them the chance, I don't know any young child, if you get them young enough, who wouldn't be interested in nature. And that's why early education, nature, you know, working with outdoor nature programs is so important.
Yeah. So
maybe just to add to that, I hear this more often, focus on the very young children, But actually, with the problems that we face today, do we still have time to focus on the young ones, as the adults, in this case, really should do something?
You asking me? The answer is yes. Of course, we work from the bottom and we work from the top. You have to. You can't afford to miss out on any level of the people out there, because we need to try and reach all of them. And how we reach the middle school, high school, who are already fixated on digital technology, video games, and so on. We try, we very often fail, but sometimes peer pressure will work. You just have to do whatever you can.
Yeah, indeed.
I don't have overall arching answers. I wish I did. I wish I could wave a wand and be like God, but I'm just human.
Yeah, and we have to start at multiple levels at the same time, if I'm understanding you well. I'm also looking at the audience already, because I'm curious to hear whether there are some pressing questions already. So be prepared. I have one more question for now, but if you want to ask something, please just raise your hand. But my question to you was, there's also a lot of positive things happening, of course. A lot of young people are joining your Roots and Shoots programs. We have these Greta Thunberg, of course, who is really famous and inspiring all young people to go onto the streets for these Fridays for Futures events. Are these kind of developments that you are positive about, or do you think it's the wrong method or the wrong way to go out demonstrating?
Well, demonstrations are okay as long as they're not too aggressive. I don't like aggressive demonstrations. I like demonstrations where the young people are leading by example. This is what we're doing, so why aren't you doing it too? That sort of thing. But, a demonstration can certainly raise awareness. Fridays for Future has raised a lot of awareness. There's everything good about that. But Roots and Shoots is all about taking action and convincing people by showing them what they can do. And this is why if only the media, there's so much doom and gloom out there, and they do need to tell us all the bad news. But if they would just give some more time to the amazing positive projects that are going on around the world, the incredible inspirational people, the way nature can come back if you give her a chance. And then that will give people hope to jump in and do more, because they suddenly realize what we're doing is making a difference.
All right. I see a question here in the front. Yeah? Yes. Are you? There's a microphone coming to you, so yeah.
Good evening. I just wanted to ask, because when I was at primary school, I never had. I had very much guests about, and they told us about Second World War, slavery, digital safety and stuff, but they never gave us a lesson about climate change. So my question was, if you would be in a classroom right now, what would you say to the children in the classroom about climate change and how we can save our planet actually right now?
Yes, I absolutely would. And I go to many, many schools and give many, many talks to different age children. And I talk to them quite honestly about the things that are going wrong in the world. Climate change is one of them. Loss of biodiversity is another. Some of the social issues are horrendous. And I talk about them all in different ways to different ages, because obviously you don't want very small children to know more about the horrors that are perpetrated, both towards people and animals. So yes, I think children should be educated, but in a way that doesn't shock and horrify them, but gives them the information. But yes, and you can change this. You want to change it. This is what you can do.
I'm also thinking we should maybe create, you were speaking about virtual Jane, who is here with us tonight. Maybe we should create like a virtual Jane for all the schools in the Netherlands. A talk from you that we can screen on all schools.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to do it.
Nice.
I think you could inspire a lot of young people. Auke Florian, did you have any questions for Jane at this moment?
Yeah, sure. During the lockdown, all events, concerts, festivals, they were all cancelled. But of course, you can't cancel nature. So collectively, we started to rediscover the parks and our local nature reserves. But my question is, how do we keep people connected to this nature nearby?
Well, by creating in them a passion for it. They've got to be interested in it. They've got to somehow be inspired. And once they're interested, they come to love it, and then they want to protect it. But they'll only continue to be inspired if they are given or suggested a way in which they personally can be involved. That's what's going to keep them motivated, a way that they can be involved in protecting something that they care about.
Yeah, so just keep them motivated to keep on enjoying nature. I see another question here in the audience.
Hello, good night. Yes, my name is Tim Boekhout van Solingen. I do nature, rainforest preservation in the Brazilian Amazon together with communities. But I have a question about nature education, particularly in Africa, for example, where many of the great apes are found. Because nature education, growing up in the Netherlands, children get to see a lot of nature and wildlife on television. But my question is, what do you know about children in Africa, and especially in the countries where there is all this wildlife? I mean, I guess since you've been working so long on this for decades, you've seen the changes. But my assumption is that it's still quite low, that still relatively few children, for example, in West and East Africa, see these documentaries. And I think you're also stimulating this. But can you say something about this? How? Because I think when we're talking about education for children in nature, it's maybe even more important in the countries that are so rich in wildlife. What do you know about this?
Well, that's where Roots and Shoots began. It began in Tanzania, and we have Roots and Shoots programs wherever JGI is working to protect chimps and forests. And so we're working in Tanzania, in Kenya, in Burundi, in Congo, in Uganda, in Senegal, and Mali. And in all these places, we're involving young people, showing them sometimes on a little cell phone some of these documentaries, but providing environmental education in the form of little books, simple books, which show the different animals so they can learn about them and explain about the animal behavior. And most importantly of all, help them to understand that these wild animals that they may have been taught are just there for food are actually sentient beings. And you can understand how difficult that is when you think that in countries like the United States, there are all these hunters who want to go out to Africa for trophy hunting and kill a beautiful animal. So we've got so far to go in so many different levels, but it's easier to convince children. And our Roots and Shoots come up with some amazing stories of children. Like one little group was 3 members of Roots and Shoots and 4 members who weren't Roots and Shoots. And they found, this was in a refugee camp, Congolese refugees, where animals are hunted, sustainable hunting. And they found this little baby bushbuck crouched in the ground. So the non-Roots and Shoots were so excited, we'll take it back, our parents will be thrilled, we get more meat. The Roots and Shoots children were saying, but suppose it was you. How would your mother think if somebody came and took you and wanted to eat you? And they argued and argued and argued. In the end, they took the little bushbuck and put it back where they found it. And we have several stories like that. So if you can get the children motivated to understand, it's incredible. And they change their parents.
Also wanted to briefly touch upon one issue that you mentioned actually in the beginning during your keynote. And you described three problems: an unsustainable lifestyle, the problem of poverty, but also the problem of population growth. And I think that is a really important, but also a really sensitive issue. And I was wondering if you could elaborate a bit more about how you're viewing this and what should we do about it? Is there anything we can do about it?
Well, yes, there is. I mentioned the Tokhari program that we started around Gombe, where the average size of a family used to be 8 to 10. And there were two reasons. One was that many infants died in the first 2 years of life, so you needed to have more children. Secondly, that when your children grew up, they would help you on the farm. And when you were old, they would work on the farm and feed you. But things have changed. And most people have understood that education of their children is really important. They want to get their children out of poverty, and they know that a good education is a way to do it. And they can't afford to educate 8 to 10 children. So the desire for large families is dropping quite rapidly. And when we provided family planning information, it was eagerly taken up, not only by women, but by men too. Men who said, I can't afford to educate all these children, and I want my children to be educated. And women who want to start their own small businesses through microcredit. And if they just have baby after baby after baby, they can't do it. But if they can space the children, then they can carry on with their business and afford somebody to help with the children. So it's a question of working with the people. And you mentioned it's sensitive, politically sensitive. So when I first began talking about this back in the early 70s, when that book, The Population Bomb, came out, everybody said, but you can't talk about population control. It's sensitive. And I said, no, control is the wrong word, absolutely the wrong word. It's not control. You don't want to step into an African country as a white person and say, I want you to control. No. So I invented a way of talking about it, which was voluntary population optimization. And by the time I talked about voluntary population optimization, people were still wondering, what does she exactly mean? And then I was on to the next thing. But it's got to be voluntary, and I love that. It's VOP, voluntary population optimization. Who can quarrel with that?
Yeah, indeed, that is something we need to remember, maybe. And I think it's also interesting what you mentioned, that there is also a relationship between economic development and these kind of questions, right? So if you have the resources to keep your family alive, also with less children, and to prepare for your older days, that's also a really important factor. I see one last question here, and then I'm also looking at Elke Florian afterwards, but first, the person over here.
Sorry, I'm here again. And I want to ask, because I think after the Second World War, and we've got a lot more materialistic, like there are very rich people they are multi-millionaire, billionaire, and they have lots of houses. And there's this man called Elon Musk, and he wants to bring people to Mars. And I thought, what would happen? Like we have loads of fabrics here, and climate change, or our ecosystems are shutting down. What would happen on Mars? If on the Earth there is this problem, would it be also on Mars?
I'm actually not sure what that question is.
Can you maybe explain it very briefly again? Because I also didn't understand it.
I wanted to ask, Elon Musk wants to send us, we are actually shutting down all our ecosystems. Will we ruin, like we're ruining the Earth? If we will build fabrics and all this stuff that ruins another planet, Like, wait, I don't know how to explain. It's very hard to explain. It's a very long question, but
Yes, it is. Well, I think what you're saying is we have to find a different way of utilizing Mother Nature's resources, because at the moment we're using them up faster than nature can replenish them in many places. But, you know, there's a lot of brains are beginning to work. This amazing intellect we have. People are coming up with new innovative solutions, ways of pest control without using chemicals and things like that. And like the movement towards non-animal based diet, plant-based diet, that's something which is really helping. And so I've just been reading a lot about a program which creates meat from a cell, and the cell comes from just a little bit of serum or blood or whatever it is taken from an animal. And they say that in 2 years' time, they won't even have to go to an animal to get that serum. It will just replicate itself in the lab. It's rather expensive. I don't know if that will take off. And there's always solving every problem leads to another problem. And that's something we have to think about ahead of time. So a plant-based diet, if everybody was on it, would there be enough land on the planet to grow enough plants? You know, you have to think ahead and think about the problems that might be created by your wonderful solution.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are really optimistic about how we can use actually technology in order to fight these problems, such as climate change. Or so I think it's interesting to hear that you're also following these developments. Auke Florian, did you have one final question, maybe, because we have to wrap up already?
Yeah, final question then. Sadly enough, I could talk on for hours, but. It's a practical one, actually, because the meeting is coming to an end. The conversation will end soon. And when we end the Zoom connection, we go on with our daily lives. But is there something we can directly do to make an impact, something positive?
Oh, yes. I mean, and we can all make different things. That's the main message of Roots and Shoots is every individual makes an impact every day, and we get to choose the impact we make. And people can make different kinds of impact, but you know, it depends who you are and what you care about. One thing people say, what's the one thing I could do? And I say, eat less meat, because this intensive animal agriculture is ruining the planet, absolutely ruining the planet. Well, then, you know, people come up with an innovative solution like using insects, like the locust plague and things like that. But then you get animal rights groups coming in and say, well, insects may be sentient too, so why should we use them? So it gets really, really difficult. And you just have to make a stand and say, well, okay, insects may have some kind of sensibility, but I'd rather have an insect eaten than a pig, which is an incredibly amazing, intelligent animal.
Yeah, and we have to start somewhere at least. I totally agree.
And some people say you can't have honey because you're harming the bees, and you can't have silk because you're harming the silkworms. Well, you know, we have to just decide how far we want to go and what would happen if we all followed all these different ethical problems. I don't know.
And just one final question from my side then, because you were traveling 300 days a year. Now you're stuck at home for a year, but still reaching millions of people with your talks and with your podcast, etc. Will this be the end of your traveling? Now you found out that working via Zoom is so amazing and you can reach a lot of people.
Yeah, well, indeed, I've reached millions more people in many more countries. But I desperately miss contact with people. I've made friends all around the world. And this work from home, non-stop, sitting looking at a screen every day, day after day, is absolutely exhausting. And I don't think I could do that forever. So I think in the future, there'll be travel, but less travel perhaps, and more time spent doing this kind of reaching out to people, a mixture of both.
Yeah.
I think many people are finding that.
So
by the way, the young man who asked the question that was difficult to understand, if he wants to send you the question, you can send it to me and I'll try and answer him because I don't think I did.
He's looking really happy now in front of me, so I think that's a really good thing. And hopefully, Mrs. Jane Goodall, we are able to welcome you someday in the Balie again, just like we did in 2019 when you were here presenting your new film. And we're really happy that you were here with us tonight via Zoom and made the time in your really busy schedule. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. A final word from you, Elke Florian.
Thanks so much.
To Jane.
Absolutely. You're such an inspiration. You heard this probably all the time, but you really are. And I think we all feel very inspired here today, are we? Yes. So thanks very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for listening and being there. And I hope to see you in person one day.
Thank you so much. And thank you, the people at home, for watching this live stream event. If you want to know more about the Balie or watch the Balie's program, please take a look at the website, www.thebalie.nl. Have a good evening.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Zo. Iedereen heeft een vraag hopelijk kunnen stellen. Ik zag niet meer hele...